inviting me. I thank IESS for inviting me to talk to you today. It's my honor to be in front with you and talk about my experience working with health savings account plans, which are health plans with an annual deductible combined with health savings account. I come from the Philippines, so this is a picture of Manila Bay. I moved to California, worked with Hewitt Associates at that time, and started developing products for different companies. During this time was the time that we were already experimenting on these types of products. Very initial stages, there was a pilot plan by the US government, which has not been transformed into law yet. And at the same time, the large health plans being exempted from some of the regulations in the insurance markets are allowed to do this into their own benefit programs. I moved to New York, PwC. Basically, at PwC, I became an auditor working also with some of the pharma companies, looking at how the changes in the market, specifically consumer-driven changes, would affect their product portfolio, work with AHIP, and also did one of the research papers with the World Economic Forum. This one was looking at how how businesses should introduce wellness programs into their health plans, and why it would be important for them to do so. And then I worked with auditing and helping some of the health insurance companies also in the US with trying to introduce some of these new concepts in wellness, also looking at ways that they could develop their own product portfolio internally, as well as introducing consumer-driven plans. I now work with Swiss Re, and I live in Zurich. Just before I start my talk, we should not forget the fact that we now live in a digital world. There's a lot of devices out there in the market that are being introduced to support wellness, to support the doctors, to support hospitals. And we should look at all of these when we try to develop the different plans. Of course, the future is digital. A little bit about the US. I know I'm supposed to talk to you about International, and in this space, if you're looking at a savings account combined with an annual deductible health plan, you have to look at the US, because it's the only market where you have these products and you can compare it with the other types of products, the traditional insurance programs as well as HMOs. And in the US, just recently, historically, they've had high medical inflations. This was the trigger to look at annual deductible health plans. It's because the inflation is uncontrolled. There's no real vision that it would minimize itself to a manageable level in the near future. And therefore, different think tanks and groups have come together and decided to experiment in this space. You can see that the trends have somewhat normalized, and it's now in line with GDP growth and the inflation, and we hope that it stays that way in the near future. Since the introduction of the Affordable Care Act, or the commonly known as Obamacare, we have seen a reduction also in the uninsured, and that's a big success for this program. However, there has been challenges, and there has been changes in the way the ACA has been operating. As you can see, it has reduced it, not by much, and hopefully we can reduce this number furthermore in the future. When looking at the US market, most of the previous illustrations concentrated on the payer. So who's paying for the program? Is it a government health plan? Is it a private health plan? Or is it simply out of pocket coming from the patients. Initially, these programs were thought that the out-of-pocket costs were quite low for the patients at 11%. However, if you look at how much the members are actually contributing to these plans, so there's a contribution portion, especially if they're in an employer program, then the participation of the household is actually up to more of 28%. And at the same time, the private companies or the businesses are contributing as well to these programs. However, you can see that the government is still paying for a majority of the healthcare costs in the U.S., and this is through the Medicare programs. Looking at it from what type of organizations have been offering these plans, we still see life and health companies as relevant. However, a large portion is being offered by MCOs, mostly HMO type companies. And that, I think, is a continuous trend in the U.S., and we might see more of the life and health companies retreat, and more of the costs being covered by managed care organizations. On this slide, I want to concentrate on the definition of consumer-driven health plans, which is different from the other types of programs in the U.S. This was introduced to help shift medical cost management from the health plans to the members. Therefore, the consumerism aspect, and this is an important key feature of these types of programs. So if you're giving the employee more skin in the game, the theory is that they will then be smarter in trying to spend that money. There could be a debate, as Cesar has mentioned, whether they do have the money to spend. And later on, I will explain how we could do that, and how companies can also help support their employees on this aspect. So what's important also is that you're pairing a high or an annual deductible health plan with a health savings account. Consumer-driven health plans have increased, so they are now about a quarter of the U.S. Health plans. This chart from Kaiser did not include the initial activities from 2002 up to 2006, and it's because it was not, these plans were either in pilot stage or is not big enough to be counted, and therefore they only started to count it at 2006 and 2015. They're already at the quarter, and we expect this to increase, especially with changes in the ACA. As you know, it's been mentioned also earlier by Cesar that if you have a luxury type plan, you will be heavily taxed. And one of the best ways to avoid this tax is to introduce an annual deductible into your plan. It's not only in the US that you will find these programs. Switzerland, where I live in, they have a different system. It's mandatory. Companies, by option, could negotiate these types of plans with specific providers. However, some companies, like Swiss Re, would only ask the employees to purchase one program in the market. So there's an open market, so it's one single market. It's similar to the ACA market if you look at it, except that all of them would have a deductible. So for ACA, the first two programs of ACA, or the first two basic plans, the bronze and the silver plans, usually have an annual deductible in them. And it's one reason why I sometimes say that, the ACA is actually promoting these types of products. So it's obligatory. They call it the Krankenkassen. They have a risk equalization system in place. This is to avoid cherry picking from the players in the market. So the risk equalization system would try and redistribute the costs based on age and and also based on some sort of health status. There are a lot of risk equalization systems in the world, and for example, the Netherlands system would have a more complicated way of doing this. The German system has also one. In Switzerland, it's a bit more simple, that if you had a previous inpatient case, then you're entitled to a slightly higher risk equalization subsidy in the next year. They have different types of products in the market. It could be open, gatekeeper, or HMO. So open is your typical PPO product. The member can go to any provider in the market that's part of the network without any control. Then they introduce a gatekeeper concept, which then lowers the premium by about, could be 10 to 15%. And then however, you have to go through a gatekeeper, and they call it Hausarzt in Switzerland. And then the next is HMO, which then you have a more restricted and limited provider network. Franquias, and this is the annual deductible. It could range from 300 francs to 2,500 francs. And the prices are varied. And of course, the higher the annual deductible, the lower the premiums to be paid. They do not have a specific health savings account in the market, and it's because the Swiss is quite an affluent community, so it's expected that they have these funds. They do have a pension fund as well that's meant to cover this. However, not topic here, but for long-term care type of coverages, they do not have a solution for it. When we tried to develop these types of products back in 2002, we were looking at the cost of the program under a traditional plan or a traditional health insurance versus the cost of the program when you have an annual deductible and a health savings account. Let's say, and these are just examples. Let's say that you have the premium is 100. Maybe here is closer to 500 or 600. Depending on the level of the deductible, you might have a 25% below discount on your premium on your annual deductible health plan. And then you look at the usual out-of-pocket out of that plan, and maybe we come to these amounts here on the left side. If we then look at how much the same claim would operate in an annual deductible plan, and I'm assuming here it's just 100, so just to make it simple, then you can see how the amounts differ at the bottom. And I have 3 columns here. One is a person with no claim, another is a person with a medium claim, and another is a person with a very high claim. You can see that the annual deductible plan would possibly promote sales to people who have very low claims, the healthier. Maybe those that have medium level claims would also be interested, depending if they have this savings built into it. And if we look at the difference between the traditional plan with no claim and the annual deductible plan with no claim, this is where the companies can possibly say, okay, I'm already spending 100, then why don't I just introduce an additional benefit to my employee and add $20 to their savings account? And why would they want to do this? It's also because consumer-driven health plans in the US have, the matured ones have trended lower than the traditional plans by at least 1 to 2%. And at the same time, if you have introduced this consumer-driven health plans in the first year, employers might see a savings just on the people moving to these plans of from 15 to up to 20%. This is quite significant depending on how many of the employees move to these plans. So it could translate on a total aggregate, maybe 2% to up to maybe 8% from a total cost perspective, and that's quite significant. Now, the illustration above did not have any co-pays or co-insurance. I'm just showing below that how does it look like with cost shares and co-insurance, and they just move in parallel going up. The next issue here is the source of funds. So not all of the payments that goes into the healthcare systems are pre-tax, and some you will have tax advantages in certain cases. So sometimes if it's an employer benefit, then you will have a tax advantage of a certain amount, and then if it's outside of that, then the employee will have to pay on an after-tax dollar. And if we say that this illustration assumes that the amounts that are being paid to the annual deductible are on an after-tax, and I've assumed a very low tax rate here of 10% only, you can see that the actual cost to the employee from a pre-tax perspective goes higher, quite a significant amount. And the reason why I show this is that when you look at these plans, you have to look at them and try to equalize the playing field between these programs. And this was also one of the issues while some in the initial stages of developing these health savings account with annual deductible in the US, they have to change some of the legislation. In fact, there are 3 types of savings accounts in the US. There's the health savings account, which is purely an account base. You've got the HRA, which is a notional amount being offered by employers. And you have the flexible savings account, which was initially only supposed to cover for direct out-of-pocket costs and co-pays. But now their legislation is gearing towards combining all of these plans together, or these accounts together. I would like to talk to you about how you can use these plans to fund for retirement health. We all know that a retirement medical program will be expensive, but this is a big problem for some of the companies that have to offer it as a benefit. If it's not offered by the employer and it's not continuous from active to retirement stage, then you will have anti-selection rates, because the cost is too high. There is normally re-underwriting, because the health insurance companies want to protect themselves. And there could be underwriting resets, like on any pre-existing conditions or waiting periods. And there could also be non-continuity of benefits. So the benefit package could be separate, or some conditions might be totally excluded for the lifetime of the new member. During my work, while I was in New York, we were looking at ways to use these types of programs to develop solutions for retirement. And we concluded that there should be a pre-funding vehicle that should be used solely for payment of premiums, so not just out-of-pocket cost, and also to pay for the co-payments of the health plans. And this means not only co-insurance, fixed co-payments, it also should include the annual deductible. And why is that? So we're creating some sort of a specific world wherein you're able to save that money and still contribute to a community pool, so that you're still part of the community, you're paying the premiums, there's cost sharing between the members, and then you're allowed to use the fund also to pay for your contribution if you need to claim. It should also take advantage of pre-tax funding as well as internal growth of that fund. It should be linked to the active to the retirement plan. And this is also a key aspect, that it allows the actuaries and those and the people analyzing the programs to be able to predict how, not with pure certainty, but have an idea on what sort of conditions are moving from the active program to the retirement program. And it makes it easier to project and calculate the premiums going forward. If everything else is equal, and all of the savings that a company would get by moving to an annual deductible program is moved to a fund. At the time of retirement, you expect that the fund will actually have zero, because the average claim in each year would be used up by the fund. And therefore, there should be a requirement to add into the fund. But if we save, for example, this amount and not use it to the lifetime of an active employee, we could say that the fund could go to a certain level that it can then pay for the premiums for that employee up to a certain age. And that's quite significant. And the problem with the long-term projections on healthcare is that you're projecting too far in the future, and you know that there's high inflation. We can, of course, debate on what assumptions to use, but the main assumption that I have here is that there is still an investment mechanism that will somewhat mitigate the inflation on medical. And that's a key assumption that we can discuss later on how we can develop such a program. But it's probably not realistic to say that we're not going to spend money on healthcare up until we retire. So I created a new case here. By the way, I used some local industry type of data to produce these charts using still a foreign model, which means that there's a lot of work to localize the chart that you're seeing here. And if let's say they just consume 150 and then raise it up to inflation, so that's very close to the annual deductible amount in my model, and then we add something like a $400 to the fund. And this is on top of what the employer is adding. And I'm assuming only that the employer is passing the savings on the annual deductible to the employee. Then the fund can still, the amount at the end of retirement is lower, of course, but it can still fund the premiums up to a certain age. Here it says 75. And if you look at the chart, you can see how hard it is to create a fund for health and how fast it depletes it. And that is the nature of the beast in healthcare. That at retirement, that's when you will consume most of the healthcare services, and especially at end stage, that's when you almost consume all of your savings just to keep healthy. If we have that solution for somebody who's younger, of course, if you're younger, then you can the fund lasts longer, and there's no problem if you save earlier. Now, for those who are retired and who are at near retirement age, you can say that it's already too late for them to save, unless, of course, they're theory in Switzerland, sometimes they say that these guys are supposed to be executives already, having high salaries, so therefore they can save more. But not everybody can be an executive. So we still need a solution for these retirees. And this is where the government can possibly help. Whether it's a joint government and joint company effort to develop some subsidies to support them until retirement. That is the question. But what's important is that if we create solutions like this for those who are younger and who are able to save, let's not forget about those who are currently in the battle or currently with certain health conditions, and it's bad enough that you're in a bad health status. It's worse if you're also in a bad financial status. Just a brief disclaimer here. As you notice, I'm from Swiss Re, but I haven't sold you any products yet. So I'm here on my personal effort because I believe in these plans. Consumer-driven health plans have been a major part of my career in the US, and I've tracked this also when I moved abroad to London and also to Switzerland. These types of programs, I think, are the way of the future, but we need to understand the nature of the beast, promote wellness, introduce consumer-driven health plans, and promote the consumerism aspect. There are a lot of advantages also of having the member becoming part of your objective when you have these health plans. It means that they are no longer trying to go to the doctor and get value out of what they paid for. Instead, they are now acting with you on your objective of making the whole healthcare system more efficient. With that, I end talking, and if you have any questions, please ask them.